Hi, everyone, and welcome to the second edition of Ask Then Anything, where you ask and hey, I answer. Today's question is brought to us by our friend Greg Palma, straight out of our Facebook group. And Greg asks us, Hi, Dan, does the 72-hour waiting period before cremation also applies to house pets? Well, that is a weird one. And why do I say that? I say that because before we try to arrive at an answer for Greg, we want to make sure that we unpack some of the assumptions and the pre-existing knowledge that goes into the question as it is. So let's break the question down a little bit and understand where Greg is coming from. Well, we all know that we are spiritual beings who are temporarily in physical form. So when we die, or what we call death, is nothing more but the detachment of our spirit from this physical body in a permanent way. So this moment of detachment that we spiritists call discarnation is a delicate and a confusing one. And sometimes it takes more time for a spirit to come to terms with the idea that he has left his physical body, but he can still exist. So waiting a little bit before disposing of the physical body in such a permanent nature, such as cremation, might make sense because it gives people or spirits some buffer, some time to acquaint themselves with the idea that they now exist in the physical world and in the spiritual world and not in the physical world. So the 72-hour suggestion actually comes from one of the well-known spiritual mentors in the spiritist knowledge or community called Emmanuel, who we are told by the medium Francis Xavier in a very famous set of TV shows back in the 70s, that we should perhaps wait 72 hours to give the spirit a chance to disconnect from the physical body. That is specifically and particularly true for cases in which we may not be certain that indeed there is a spiritual reality. So the less we think about spirituality and get ourselves acquainted with spirituality, the more difficult it generally is for us to adapt to the spiritual world when we pass, when we discarnate, as we say. And I think that's obvious because we don't think about the spiritual world. We are very surprised when we are faced with it. So the 72-hour period, as it applies to humans, so to speak, is based on the idea of giving the discarnating spirit enough time to acquaint itself with the spiritual reality, as opposed to having to deal with its physical body being destroyed, which could be a traumatic experience if you still believe you are the physical body, right? Now, then Greg takes that idea and translates that into the animal realm and asks if the same is applied to animals. And this is when we go a little bit back to the Spirits book and look at questions 597, about 600 or so, where Kardec asks the good spirits about the three different kingdoms. And in that set of questions that we find there in the Spirits book, we are going to learn that the animals, of course, they do have a spiritual nature as well, and that they also survive the death of their physical body, and that they have the spiritual individuality that remains. But we also understand, and I think that it makes sense to us after we think about it, that animals are still mainly guided by instinct in this spiritual phase of ours, and are not exactly capable of a lot of self-reflection. Because they are not as self-aware as we are, they don't ask themselves questions of, oh my God, have I died? Or who am I? Or what's next? These are questions that we deal with in the human stage of evolution. So because they are guided by instinct and receive obviously a lot of help from our spiritual mentors as well, it is my personal belief, and this is my speculation, that the discarnation process, it's a lot easier and a lot faster It's more of an automatic thing. There isn't a lot of agonizing over it because once it happens, animals just kind of move on. Just like everyday interactions with our animals, when they tend to live more in the moment and not necessarily dwell on different things. So I think that what we end up landing on here is the idea that the discarnation process for animals is a lot more automatic, is a lot faster. They actually reincarnate a lot faster than we do as well for that very reason, because their mental field, their self-reflection, their mental cognition, and their mental abilities are not as developed. Uh, but also at the same time, they do not hold animals back into thinking about themselves and what state they are in. It's a lot more automatic. So I hope that it helps for us to think a little bit more about spirituality in general. But at the same time, I also recognize that our spiritual friends, especially those pets that live close to us, are really dear and near to our hearts, that we love them quite a bit. And that's very okay. So if it brings you comfort to wait a little bit more before you dispose of their bodies, you can certainly do that. Although I think you probably don't need to. But it's important for you to be comfortable with your decisions. And I hope that talking about this as well may open a whole line of questioning for you to investigate about ourselves as spirits and our spiritual nature and that of animals, and that it may whet our appetite to continue to think about our spiritual selves and what happens to us when we leave this physical body, when we shed this mortal coil, as Shakespeare says in Macbeth. So I hope that we can have an opportunity to continue to ponder about these important questions, and I hope that it puts your mind at ease a little bit as well as to the discarnation of our animal friends, and that this answer, or at least this perspective, brings you a little bit of insight into what could happen when that takes place. Thank you again for your question, and I hope that you will ask more questions, not only of myself, but of yourself and the people around you, and keep this conversation going. Have a great day.